really encouraged by the number of LGBTQ movies that were released this year, and the variety of the stories. But I still feel like we have a long way to go. I'm greedy. I want more. I want to see more stories.
I would like to see a lot more stories as well. Do you think, well, before we move on from this topic, do you think we'll ever get to the day? I agree with everything you said. Do you think we'll ever get to the day where we have like a George Clooney or like a Brad Pitt, like someone of that, like the $100 million movie, the $25 million salary, where like this is a gay man who lives an out gay lifestyle, and it's a lead role where you're playing the romantic lead and you're straight. Like, do you think we'll ever see that in our lifetime?
Absolutely. I'm an optimist in that sense, and I've seen the needle of progress move over the last 20, 30 years, and I can't help but think 20 or 30 years from now that we will be at that place.
That's great. Well, you mentioned Jim Parsons earlier. How involved were you in the casting of this movie? Were you involved at all? And like, what is it like having Jim Parsons play you?
Well, I had the decision of who I wanted to give the option of this book to. And I knew that part of the package deal with Jim was that he would play me. So basically, I had total control over the casting of Jim because it was my decision to get into business with him and take this journey with him. So I knew going in that he would play me, and I was on board with that right out of the gate. I never. I didn't have like an idea in my head like this is who I would want to play me in a movie of my life. Even when this movie became a real thing, I didn't really have thoughts of that. But I have so much respect for Jim, and I was excited to see what new things Jim would bring to this role. Like I never imagined or thought or wanted him to like do an impersonation of me or mimic me or anything like that. I was excited to see his own version of Michael. And I was constantly surprised at the choices, pleasantly surprised at the choices and decisions he made in the places he took the character.
Were you a fan of The Big Bang Theory?
And I covered it religiously on TV Line, and at Entertainment Weekly before that. That's how I met Jim, was covering Big Bang Theory and interviewing him repeatedly. And we developed a really fun rapport during those interviews, and that sort of led me to asking him to moderate the Q&A at Barnes & Noble the week my book came out.
What about, do you think with like reboot mania, do you think we should have a Big Bang Theory? Or do you think it's way too early for that?
Oh, I absolutely think it's way too early. And I wouldn't want to reboot. I maybe in a couple of years I'd be interested in a revival. Like I'd like to see. I wouldn't want to see that show with new characters and new actors, because I think it'd be an impossible. There's no way that they would be able to match the success of the original. But I think down the road I'd like to revisit those characters in a revival and see what they're up to.
What about, like you chose Jim and Jim was so great, this movie is so great, it's going forward. Where were you? Like, how did Sally Field get involved? Where were you when you heard that Sally Field was going to play Kit's mother?
So Sally Field's name was always bandied about right from the beginning, just because of her relationship with Michael Showalter, our director. They had worked together on My Name is Doris. They have remained close since. But also, Sally had a connection to our co-screenwriter, David Marshall Grant. They worked together on Brothers and Sisters. So she had two very strong connections to this project. So her name naturally was coming up as a possibility to play Kit's mom. That didn't mean that she would play Kit's mom, and I refused to allow myself to get invested in that outcome until it became real. When it did become real, it didn't feel real. It felt like I was having an out-of-body experience when I got the word that Sally was definitely going to be in our movie. As someone who has admired her work for so long, I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. Then it became about, well, I won't believe it until I'm on set and I'm seeing her in a scene. And then when that happened, it's like, well, I'm not going to believe it until this movie comes out. or at least until I see the movie. And I have seen the movie and I still can't wrap my head around it.
I get it. I've interviewed people like of her level on the show, and I'm like, until you're sitting here on a Zoom with me, I will not believe that this is actually happening even 30 seconds before it actually happens. So
Right.
I totally understand it. What would Kit feel? How would Kit feel about Sally Field playing his mother?
Well, he was a big Sally Field fan, and I imagine he would be thrilled by that. I get asked a lot what Kit would think about the movie, and I balk at that question because I would never want to speak for Kit, especially when it comes to matters of art, because he always had very strong opinions. But I do think he would be a huge fan of the fact that we cast Ben Aldridge as him. I think he would love that we cast an extremely handsome and attractive guy to play him.
Nothing wrong with that, right? Well, like I said, like I followed your career when you were at TV Guide and then TV Line and Entertainment Weekly. The Ausiello report was like a staple of mine. I mean, Entertainment Weekly, listen, was the Bible back in the day. I mean,
Oh my God. Even before I was working there, I was obsessed with it. Yeah.
Back when like we used to get magazines in the mail and like I remember waiting every week. I mean, I had no magazine subscription ever in my entire life except for Entertainment Weekly. It was,
and then sometimes it would come on Thursday, and then sometimes you show up at your mailbox, it's not there, and you're like, what the hell? I have to wait till
like that's how we got all of our news. What were, because we learned from this movie, and just I know like Felicity was a big thing for you, the Gilmore Girls. You and I are around the same age, we grew up around the same time, so I'm just curious, like what were growing up, like you can date yourself now, like what were your pop culture obsessions growing up?
Daytime television, Days of Our Lives, and to a larger extent Santa Barbara were huge parts of my childhood. And I was obsessed with both of those shows, to the point where I even went to a Days of Our Lives convention when I was in high school. Twin Peaks was a seminal show in my childhood. X-Files was another one, but also primetime soap operas, Dallas, Falcon Crest, Dynasty. I was a soap opera guy.
Dallas is literally my favorite show of all time. So there you go. Literally.
You been to the real South Fork?
I went for the 40th anniversary the last time they had it. I think 2018. I mean, Larry Hagman wasn't there, but like Linda Gray, Patrick Duffy, Charlene Tilton, Steve Canale. It was like everything.
I've never been. That's on my bucket list to get to South Fork.
You need to go. It's really, it's different than you expect, but it's still like you're there.
Because it's smaller than you. It's not like this huge mansion.
It's smaller and like the inside's different, but you get to go on that, like, where they had either their outside breakfast all the time and the driveway, and you're just like,
I gotta get.
Yeah. You're like, this is a bucket